приглашаю на эту сцену Лорен Браун, директора по спецпроектам, и Кейтлин Ху, редактора по геополитике из совершенно блестящего интернет-издания, которое на русском звучит как «Quartz», а на английском как «Quartz». So.
Okay, so first we just want to thank Vlast for having us. We wanted to come here last year for the first conference, but we weren't able to, so this event has been 2 years in the waiting for us. I'm Caitlin Hu, geopolitics editor, which means we look at politics on a few international axes: trade, corruption, immigration, and space. And this is Lauren Brown, my co-collaborator.
Again, thanks so much to Slava and Kairat for having us, and to Almaty for being such an incredibly welcoming city. I'm one of the co-founding editors of Quartz, or one of the original founding editors of Quartz, and I'm our director of special projects. So that means I work across the newsroom with the product team and design and marketing and comms and sales to create really ambitious, high-concept storytelling features that have unique product experiences and that bring in a lot of revenue.
So we want to tell you about this book. We made it last year, and it was something pretty new for us. But first, what is Quartz? We have a pretty distinctive way of storytelling, and we feel like that's fundamental to understanding how we made the book and why it matters.
So Quartz was launched in 2012, and our real kind of organizing principle is to be a guide to the global economy for people who are excited about change. Kind of the twin issues of globalization and technology have vastly changed the way that the world does business, and that also changed the way that we tell these stories. So because of this new kind of journalism, primarily geared toward the internet and Quartz being a digital-only publication, we really rethought the way that we told our stories, both to have good impact and also to really add value to users. We have this principle where we say we report on what's the intersection of interesting and important. So, you know, when we launched, there were about 15 of us in a loft in Soho in New York City. We were never going to be able to compete with a publication like the New York Times or the Guardian. So we said, we don't have to be the paper of record. We're not going to tell every story. We're going to tell the stories that are important, but also are interesting. So this is an example of a story where Quora, the question asking and answering platform, there was an incident where an engineer who was applying for jobs spoke very candidly about his 2 job prospects and which one he should go to. And the CEO of one of the companies said, "Thanks, but no thanks. We actually don't want you." So this was a kind of crazy story. And also it really speaks to the new world that we're in terms of hiring and the future of work.
And the way that we communicate.
So something huge about Quartz, the way we tell stories, and also something that you'll see when we talk about the book more, is we have this really great descriptor called things, right? So things are really tidbits, something that in traditional legacy media might be a fact or a statistic. It could be a picture, and it's kind of hidden in this long story. And because of the internet, every publication, every story has to fight for its readers. We want to give you guys the most interesting tidbits right away. Often we say it's what you would tweet about a story. It's the most interesting piece.
So things occupy one end of what we call the Quartz Curve. The Quartz Curve is a conceptual tool that we use to approach stories. On the left side is things, which are often concise, focused, short pieces under 500 words. You consider this x-axis as sort of length and investment of effort. The other really successful kind of story for us is on the far right side of the curve, really ambitious, deep dive, deeply nerdy stories that are really authoritative and comprehensive for the reader. In between that, the standard sort of 700 write-up of something that happened, we don't do too much of. We can use the same method, or we can use both methods for the same story. As an example, last year, a terrible hurricane swept through one of an island that belongs to the US called Puerto Rico. And the government locally and federally was not really prepared for it. A lot of people died, and many more people died in the aftermath of the disaster. One of the major criticisms of the government was that not only were they not prepared for it, they really did not manage to rebuild or offer sort of the infrastructure and reconstruction that people needed in order to get electricity back, to get to hospitals, and to build roads, get water, all that stuff. So this would be an example of a thing. This is a highly publicized photo of newly inaugurated President Trump throwing some paper supplies to people in Puerto Rico. In a situation where what Puerto Ricans needed was water or electricity for months after the disaster, this was seen as a great visual metaphor for the shallowness of government efforts. On the long end of the curve, Quartz also did a deep investigation. We partnered with a local investigative reporting outfit in Puerto Rico, and we spoke to hundreds of families across Puerto Rico with an online survey and on the ground, trying to understand really how many people died from from the hurricane and when. This is relevant because 6 months out, 8 months out, 1 year after the hurricane, people shouldn't still be dying from this natural disaster unless there's really a problem with the way that the government has addressed bringing help to people who need it. Local government initially reported that some 60 people had died. We found hundreds. Recently, the government came out with more than 1,000 deaths.
So another real organizing principle of Quartz is that instead of traditional beats and verticals like tech and lifestyle and business, we have obsessions. So we have obsessions because our reporters are obsessive themselves, and because we think this is a better way to cover the global economy. Our obsessions are phenomena that span traditional verticals, and they also have a thesis. So you can see a few of our obsessions here, and they change yearly. Some of them, have to do with what's going on in the news, but largely they are ways for us to kind of look into the future. So you can see here, one of our obsessions is called Machines with Brains, and there is this thesis that drones and robots and self-driving cars are really going to reinvent industries as far-reaching as transportation and healthcare and commerce. So on the bottom here would be your traditional verticals, and there might be a tech reporter who covers just those areas, but Quartz sees kind of the intersection between these areas within this obsession. And as you can see, our approach is working. We have over 80 million monthly users through our multi-channel experience. So that means that we have QZ.com, which is some of the stories Caitlin was showing earlier, but we also reach readers on Facebook and Twitter. We have a really robust set of email newsletters. We have an app and a variety of other products that we'll show you real quick. Our readership has grown greatly. We have a presence in Africa and India. We have our Quartzy website, which looks at living well in the global economy, and Quartz at Work, which is management. Here are some of our email newsletters and an app that is kind of chats with you. And here is a view of, in our office, we have a workshop that also houses a bot studio and special projects. So all of these initiatives are really challenging the way that we tell stories in a digital format, which really calls into question why a new media organization that is so preoccupied with mastering digital storytelling would decide to do a book 5 years into its tenure.
Yeah, so just to emphasize that all of this was built in 5 years. After 5 years, we thought, okay, we figured out digital. What can we do with paper? And the premise was, if Quartz can figure out these new sort of creative and conceptual ways of approaching journalism, and we have conviction that those are effective and important ways of telling stories, can we apply the same creativity to print? As journalists, we had this nostalgia for print, like any writer, and seeing your words on the written page. But print also has incredible creative potential. There's the architecture of the paper itself, that you can work with it in terms of die cuts, fold-outs, inserts that allow you to tell stories in physical ways. There's also, the more traditional creative opportunities in terms of the paper type and gloss and binding. So we intended going into print to use all these tools to tell stories that were really perfectly suited in a creative way to suit both the medium and also the narratives about the global economy that we wanted to tell.
And we challenged ourselves to see if we could use those same tricks, obsessions, things, long end and short end of the curve to really inform doing print in a different way than, say, other business publications.
So we gave ourselves a brief. Whatever book we made had to be visually stunning. It had to use the paper medium as a native storytelling device. It had to it had to be about objects, or had to be grounded in objects, because we were going back to the physical object as a storytelling vehicle, and it had to be stories that were so important and interesting and future-looking that people would look in the book, they would read it and take it off its shelf 5 years from now, because that's what you do with books. So this is a little preview into the stories of the book, if it plays. And if not, we'll just tell you about the stories. Okay, so this was the strapline of the book. You may not have seen these objects before, but they've already changed the way you live. Each chapter of the book examined one object that was driving radical change in the global economy, from how we communicate, what we eat, to how we shop, and how we work.
Part of the reason also that we decided to do objects as our kind of organizing principle is that how do you talk about the global economy? There's numbers, there's GDP, there's analysis, there's stock markets, but a lot of times it's boring and it's dry and it's also really hard to grasp onto. So we thought objects are both really visual and also very concrete.
And to be fair, we had a large presence in terms of data analysis and charts online, so we thought, let's try something new. So, the first step was identifying the 10 objects. By doing this, what we really did is look at where did we think the global economy was really changing, going to be really interesting, and then narrowing down inside of those fields to find the one object that was sort of the catalyst for that change.
But also, we wanted to pick objects that had changed the economy and were, vastly important and vital, but that you've never seen them before. So we kind of gave ourselves an impossible task, and it took months and months and months of research to actually settle on them. So it even I get a flashback of the pain of picking these. It makes it seem so easy when we just breezily show you these 10 objects, but it was really hard to do.
So one of the first we came up with actually was reefer, the refrigerated shipping container, which allowed us to then do a chapter about the future of food supply and the increasing demand for fresh vegetables and even luxury foods in developing markets.
The next object is the active pixel sensor, which is the device that allows our phones to become cameras and kind of make machines have eyes into the world.
The Seabed mining machine, I'm very excited about this. It's a resource extraction. Mineral extraction is a long industry in the world, but now we're reaching to really distant places, asteroid mining, deep sea mining, and how we're going there and what that means for those environments is really interesting.
The next object is the gene sequencing machine, which really has enabled us to understand our own DNA and the DNA of animals and plants and food. So it really speaks to the future of food, the future of medicine, and agriculture. The next object is Satoshi's paper, which came out in 2009 and really laid out the underpinnings of Bitcoin and blockchain, which is the kind of theoretical framework of all cryptocurrency. Modafinil is the next object. It is a new kind of drug that's thought to be the next generation of brain hacking. And this entire chapter looks at, now that we have this really knowledge-based economy, the fight for getting ahead is enhanced by various methods of brain hacking. The next object is the server farm, something really huge and kind of abstract, but the way that we're all able to connect to the internet is tied to giant physical data servers, and it's really difficult to find places to put them, both environmentally and ones that will kind of serve the public.
This is an iris scanner. It just, as a note, all of these photos show the real objects. We managed to get companies and different people to send over either their objects themselves, like the DNA coding machine, or scale models. This is an iris scanner, and we wanted to use this chapter to talk about biometric surveillance in the world. The battery, obviously, lithium is hugely important. Without the battery, none of our devices would work. So the future of the battery, a smaller battery, a battery that holds more energy, we felt was, you couldn't not talk about it when you're talking about the future of the global economy. And the turbopump. Commercial space investment is booming. Privately owned satellites, privately run space launches. How to make space profitable, and the race to do that was our concluding chapter. So one thing I want to point out about what you've just seen is that the language, the visual language of all these objects is not a traditional mode of reportage. These are studio shots. They look a lot like product shots. And we worked with photographers who were commercial photographers who worked with Prada and Dolce & Gabbana to do these incredibly beautiful, kind of quirky photo shoots to show off products. And we thought this was an important way to show these unseen industrial objects and tools in a new light, and to convince readers from the first page that these were going to be there was something beautiful about this story.
And part of why we have, you'll see, such a focus on the visuals and cared about beauty so much is we thought, you know, we do business journalism. Quartz really cares about making business journalism fun and interesting. So if we're going to do a book, we want it to be beautiful. And we think this project is a true marriage of art and journalism, and how you can have both. You can have really wonky business stories that also look really beautiful and are accurate and true. So we, again, set ourselves up with a kind of Herculean task of, over 5 years, building up this newsroom. At that time, it was over, I think, 150 people. Today, we're 250 people. But all these people who we needed to indoctrinate and make understand how to do the Quartz way of storytelling, how to be digital first, how to kind of rewrite the rules of journalism. And then we kind of put a pause on that and said, hey, guess what? Now you have to do print. So what we did was, and this was everything from our business side to our product and our designers to our journalists, needed to learn to write for print, needed to understand kind of how to tell stories that would be important and lasting. We had to have our marketing team turn into print distributors and a crew of logistics.
It was a total overhaul. We also created our own digital system for organizing files, a filing and editing system that was different and separate within the newsroom just for this book. We basically created a mini newsroom just about print.
And our designer, award-winning print designer who is Italian, was based in Spain, and our printer was based in Italy. So there were lots of time change issues and lots of language barriers. We had illustrators, as you'll see on the next slide. We had contributors from 15 different countries around the world, which includes Quartz staff, but also illustrators, designers, academics, in Asia, Africa, South America, who Caitlin and I were coordinating over the year to put this book together.
Just a note about the importance that we put on how to tell a story also. This is a sketch, an early sketch, and this is an actual render that we mocked up of how the book could look if we were able to do a glow-in-the-dark cover. I really wanted to do a glow-in-the-dark cover. That got scrapped because it didn't make sense. It didn't advance any of the stories. It was just a cool gimmick. And that was a line for us in the stories. How much could we push the boundaries of storytelling while still in service to the story?
And as you see, Quartz, we never want to be gimmicky. We never want to do things just to kind of get attention. It really needs to serve the story.
So what you're looking at here is our Bitcoin chapter. This page that he's opening up on graph paper is a different kind of paper. It's actually a very thin traditional graph paper, and some data visualization and stuff. We wanted to show you this example of the Bitcoin chapter because we thought that the way that we managed to make such a digital and abstract topic concrete was pretty novel. You hear a lot about Bitcoin. You don't know a lot about how you actually mine Bitcoin. You just know that computers do it. But the mathematics behind mining Bitcoin is fairly simple. So what we did is we created a worksheet for the ordinary reader to actually do the math of mining a Bitcoin. This is the same thing that a computer does in a server farm in Inner Mongolia or in Iceland. The only difference is that you would have to do this millions of times to mine a Bitcoin.
So part of the reason we wanted to do this as well is interactives are something that are important for Quartz online. How do you do a physical interactive? And how do you have a book that's engaging and actually has readers be interactive with it?
To further tell the story, so like in a way that we expanded the chapter around Bitcoin and blockchain, we looked at sort of the geopolitical reflection that Bitcoin made. So how did investment in Bitcoin react to Brexit, for example? You can see there's a strong rise early in the morning from midnight to about 5 a.m. as investors and ordinary people started to turn away from traditional institutions. And we thought it was important to show the physical space. What does the mining of Bitcoin mean physically to like the people who work on it, the laborers who maintain the machines, and the ecological environment around where it's mined? Another example here is our Seabed mining chapter. This is about resource extraction. We worked with the Harvard Geological Museum and MIT materials scientists to figure out what would be a new table of elements for the new global economy. What are the minerals and the metals that are really most essential to how we power our devices and how we build our infrastructure that are most quickly disappearing? So this was to set the framework for this race that we're showing of different companies in different countries trying to monopolize resources so that they can ensure their future.
This is my favorite photo in the book. It's snails.
These snails are, so as people race to the sea floor to mine under the ocean, which is a relatively unexplored territory, lots of animals, lots of plants are endangered by sort of this digging up underground. The scalyfoot gastropod is one of them. It's unique. It has all these different colors because it covers itself with iron, actually. And mining affects language, so we showed that too, because in each case we're trying to show the universe around each object. This is an artificial language called Fanakalo that was developed in South Africa during the big diamond and gold mining boom in order for mine owners to control mine workers. So they brought mine workers from all across Africa who spoke different languages, taught them one single language that was the working language, but it was conceptually limited. It only had words for how to respond to your bosses and how to do the work. It didn't offer a clear way for people to communicate about, say, labor organizing. This chapter is about brain hacking.
So again, as you can see in this chapter, we talk about modafinil, that's the object that underpins it, and it's very contemporary, but since the beginning of time, human beings have consumed caffeine, have consumed cot leaves, and a variety of other substances to make themselves alert, to make themselves be able to work longer and harder. So again, in this chapter, we looked at kind of the historical context of this kind of feature of human life, and also contemporarily where we're going. So that previous photo was a brain hacking conference in New York, geared around electrical brain stimulation, which has been thought to cure depression. And this, again, speaking historically, looks at these tablets they were called Forced March. They were essentially speed and given to soldiers back in World War II. And this is a
Hong Kong convenience store. Part of what we wanted to do was also show the economy around some objects. So in the case of this, there's a historical precedent for the, sale and consumption of mind-altering or mind-enhancing drugs, including like caffeine, nicotine. So we went around the world, India, Hong Kong, the US, to look at these ordinary street vendors who in fact peddle minor brain hacking drugs.
And again, for every story, we really want to be global. So it's really easy in the US for a story about brain hacking to seem kind of situated in Silicon Valley, and we wanted to show it's actually much larger than that.
So what you see here is our chapter about commercial space. You can see we used a fold-out here to demonstrate sort of the incredible distance of space. It's very small scale, but an effective way inside of sort of the larger economy of the book to show that. Can I go to the next slide? Okay. So this is an overview of some of the visual storytelling we used in the book. This is the a table of elements that was reimagined for a future economy of the most important elements. This is the brain hacking conference in New York that we sent photographers to. This is the Strait of Malacca in East Asia, which is a major shipping choke point. And these are men in, I think, Yemen, I can't recall. Chewing khat, which is also an energetic drug. This is about the future of energy.
And solar panels, and an illustration in North Korea showing what a potential energy future looks like. So you can see we have a vast mix of original photographs, commissioned photographs, illustrations, wire photos.
Well, this is one of my favorite images from the book. What you see here is in the in the chapter talking about commercial space, we wanted to show some of the uses of satellites, which are really hard to visualize because much of what satellites are used for is spying, international spying between countries, a lot of serving you internet, not things that are easy to show. But one thing that is fascinating is that satellites are also used to peep into other countries' oil reserves and figure out how much oil they have left to sort of predict what oil markets are going to be like. Now, with these pictures that can be shot from satellite, you can see inside these huge oil tankers. And the way oil tankers work is that the lids on them fall down as the level of the oil falls. So by calculating the shape of the shadow inside each one, a skilled analyst could figure out how much oil was left in a tank and in a country, and therefore make some educated guesses about what the future of oil markets might be in the next month or next year. And of course, in talking about space, we didn't forget Kazakhstan's important role in the global space economy. These are all people who landed in Kazakhstan and are given this traditional bread. So we took advantage of our total control of the space in the book to offer the recipe for this bread.
So as you know, a big part of storytelling for the global economy is data, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't just use paper as a way to populate our pages with a lot of words. We wanted to use data visualization. So an example here is in the gene sequencing chapter, how do you visualize a genome? You know, since 1993, when the human genome began being sequenced, we hear about it, but what does that actually look like? So we had an expert sequence the entire genome so that you could kind of get a feel for all of the different chromosomes and understand the complexity. And we pulled out a single chromosome, chromosome 11, to show you at various points exactly where a mutation occurs and what disease might follow.
So for example, do you know where your ADHD is? It's literally here. Or on the same chromosome where the predictor gene for breast cancer is. It's just on the upper right. Same thing with the space visualization. We also made a video of this. So what you see here, this is a data visualization of all of the satellites that are orbiting Earth. The different rungs around Earth serve different purposes. So if you are serving internet through satellites, you're going to use these swarms of small satellites close to Earth. The further you go out, the different the satellite uses are. The middle rang here is GPS satellites, which stay in a fixed position around Earth. And we did take a few liberties with the physical presence of paper to mess with the idea a little bit of what an interactive is. When you think about interactives, in the digital space, a lot of times it's data that you can play with. It's a chart or an interactive that you can sort, show me all of this or show me all of that. In paper, you can't do that so easily, but there is a natural interactive to paper that every school child knows, which is called stickers. So we made stickers.
For our biometric data chapter.
What these stickers are, we collaborated with scientists and with an artist based in Berlin to create stickers that respond to the algorithms that are used to identify people's faces. So when you pass under a surveillance camera in the street, or if you're at customs or at border security, you get a camera taking a picture of your face, that image is automatically analyzed to figure out who you are and what you are.
Or even the new iPhone, which now has...
Face ID.
Yeah.
So what these stickers do is they scramble the way that those algorithms calculate the ratios of your face to identify you as a human. And if you put them on, in theory, you could be walking through a crowd, surveillance cameras scanning the crowd would try to identify almost everyone, but not you, because for you, to the machine, you would just seem like a plant or some non-human object. These are real Quartz reporters. They just happen to look this good.
So just kind of a little wrap-up of by the numbers. The book was 140 pages. We had 100 footnotes, which were little stories, articles, sidebars, maps, a poster of animals, a woman with no fingerprints, a painting from North Korea. We say that we don't want to, or I say as an editor, I don't want to, edit any story that I wouldn't want to read myself. We didn't want to make a book that wasn't going to be, really engaging and interesting to us. So then...
This also was a success.
back to online, how were we going to get this book into people's hands? We were going to make a website, and we were going to make a website that was as clean and beautiful as the book, and really got people into the experience of the book. Quartz had never before sold anything directly to consumers. So Caitlin and I had spent all this time making this book and then thought, oh my God, is anyone gonna buy it? Here you can see in the screenshot from Kazakhstan, the book in Kazakh dollars. I'm pretty sure Slava and Kairat were the first to own the book, maybe the first to own it outside of the US. They're our biggest fans and we're theirs. But you can see here, we sold the book directly on this website that we made, as well as on Amazon.
Oh, yeah, right, on Amazon. Sorry, I just want to point out here, we had printed a run. Our estimate was actually way off. It was low for how many people would buy the book, so we had to quickly try to reprint it after a few months.
So you can currently buy the book on Amazon. And so dealing with Amazon was an Amazon fulfillment center. There was lots of logistical considerations. So
one thing we had planned for, but not enough, was that you can make a book, but at the end of the day, the book has to be brought to someone, and if they don't get it in their hands, it's not really very much good. So the logistics supply chain for this was redrawn several times to figure out how to get it to people in time.
We had our printer outside of Bologna. They then drove books. We had ships take books to 3 different warehouses in the US. Italy goes on vacation for nearly a month right before our book was supposed to come out. So that totally messed up our supply chain, and instead of 3 ships, we needed some airplanes and a boat, and there were more cars, and it was very stressful, but these books got to the US.
But after doing a whole chapter about logistics, it was actually great to experience logistics firsthand.
So as Caitlin said, we sold out over 2,500 copies of the book within 2 weeks, customers in 69 different countries. We got press in the Financial Times and Wired. Wired said, the book makes you look smart, refined, and also like you have an aesthetic appreciation for beautiful objects. We hope it actually does make you smart and refined and not just make you look that way, but that's a plus too. We had books at Davos and other huge conferences because Quartz cares about, our audience, our global business professionals. Part of our marketing strategy was to get it into the hands of influencers like Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates and Martin Sorrell, and over 100 influencers had a copy of the book.
But I'd like to say, we always keep in mind our first readers. And we think that for any large, really important creative process that you spend a lot of time and effort into, you have to keep in mind your most important readers and the person that you should always thank when you do your work.
And that's our moms. Moms are key. So it obviously took hundreds of people to make this book, and our huge support from our editor-in-chief and our founders of Quartz. But Alison Brown and Aletta Stephen get huge shout-outs because moms are important. And we say, there's a saying in journalism that if your mom tells you she loves you, fact-check her. So we kind of balance that by, we always fact-check our mom and then we thank her.
Yeah, you will have one mic if it's okay. Спасибо большое. Мы знали, что это будет потрясающе с самого начала. Мы переходим к вопросам, на которые у нас не так много времени. Но, конечно, вопросы могут быть не только про книгу, но если вы, как и мы, являетесь фанатами Quartz, то вы можете спрашивать, или Quartz, вы можете спрашивать о какой-то другой работе, от приложения до бесконечности. Гулим, вижу. Давайте начнем вот с этой стороны, потом Гулим микрофон пойдет.
Hello, thank you very much for your lecture today. Basically, two questions. First of all, do you plan to reissue this book? Because obviously it will be getting old in time, because the information is actual for right now. And second question, how do you feel for yourself? The book is different versus like any kind of economic or scientific encyclopedia. Because it is telling people about the basic things in a manner that the reader will understand. And there is some sort of resemblance in terms of the encyclopedic knowledge. Thank you.
I'm going to take the first one. So you can still buy the book. We are still selling it. Again, as Caitlin said early on in the presentation, we wanted to make something that would persist. Lots of business news organizations do kind of year-end reports, and we think, that's kind of cool for a couple months, and then it's perishable. So we hope that, even 5 years down the line, this book is still relevant. As we were kind of going through the logistical issues and trying to rush to get the book out after our reporting, Caitlin kept using the example of, well, Elon Musk might die. We have to get this book out before he dies, because then that interview that we do is no longer relevant. We needed a break. We didn't talk about the book, I think, for a year after we did it because it was so intense. But I definitely would, love to revisit it. But again, we made it in such a way that a lot of the information still stands and is still relevant.
Yeah, and in terms of the encyclopedic nature of the book, I think that's exactly right. We did sort of try to create, a guide to the entire global economy, a universal look at how the world works and how we think it will work in 5 years. To do this, in the beginning, our inspiration came from some very old magazines. Colors magazine, which is this Italian magazine. I actually used to work there previously. And the Whole Earth catalog, from which many other magazines were derived, which is this idea that you could take a global look at the world, and it may not be, everything, but it was enough to give like a different perspective, seeing the Earth, from a distance and trying to follow the threads that wrapped around it instead of going deep into any one thing.
And I think in terms of thinking forward, this is a framework for a way to do things. We could do 10 more objects in this same style, or we're super obsessive, so we could do an entire book using that new periodic table of elements and explore that. We talked about, measurements of the global economy. We almost like to currency. We like to challenge ourselves with the wonkiest, seemingly most boring things like weather, and how do you make an entire book about inches or meters or, clouds and rain, and we would do it.
Гулим.
Hi, ladies. Well, my curious mind simply fell in love with your platform. I have checked in your platform. I've signed up to your Instagram page. It's just amazing. It's bravo to you. And my question relates to the early beginnings of your project. Were you scared that people will not be able to read your materials, or they will not be not educated, but the ability to grasp your materials, it has to be a very well-educated person, the reader. So what technologies or techniques do you use to attract readers to like what you write about and like the scientific news that you cover? Would you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I think, well, while we do try to go into things in a sophisticated way, we always keep in mind a reader who doesn't necessarily know about the story. And I think part of the work of journalism, and at least the way that we frame it, is to make it clear to people, not just telling them, but showing them that what you're saying is important to them, that it touches their lives. And from the diversity of sort of stories that we put in each chapter, I think we tried to find a way that offered irrefutable evidence that the objects or the scientific news, the technical aspect, the Bitcoin, was touching the way that you live or that you will live.
As expanding on what Caitlin said, we always say that we want to be, we want experts in fields to be really compelled by what we write and think that it's really smart, but we also want to be very clear and engaging to a more general audience. So whether you're, a Bitcoin expert, you would think that our chapter was really cool, or if you've never heard of it before, we, do the journalism and tell the story in a way that it's clear and compelling. And I'm not sure if you were asking this, but in terms of, whether we were worried whether anyone would actually buy the book, Quartz, if we have, say, 20 million people every month who come to our website, we also have what we call kind of super users. It's about 50,000 people who use our app, sign up for our emails, visit our website, and just really know and love us. So we thought even if just 10% of them were to spend money on Quartz, the book could be a success. And again, I think measurement is really important. So not only do we use traffic to get a sense of whether we're connecting with our audience, we do user surveys. So we've surveyed our audience extensively to see, do you like what we do? How many of our products do you use? Would you spend money on something that's Quartz? And we say about Quartz that there's two groups of people. There's people who love Quartz, and there are people who don't yet know Quartz. So partly we're here so you guys can love us too.
For sure. Гулим.
Да, работает. У меня такой вопрос. Я посмотрела по социальным сетям, и, например, в Фейсбуке, в Инстаграме у вас очень много подписчиков, как вы и говорили. Там в Фейсбуке, например, 2,5 миллиона человек на вас подписано. Но что интересно, мне показалось, что очень малое вовлечение в самой ленте новостей. Там мало репостов, мало лайков, не так много комментариев и не так много постов, которые набирают достаточно большое количество лайков для такого количества подписчиков. У меня вот в связи с этим, это в Инстаграме и в Фейсбуке я посмотрела. В связи с этим у меня вопрос, важны ли для вас соцсети как самостоятельные площадки, медиа, да, там, для продвижения ваших сайтов, ваших публикаций? И почему так происходит? Важный вопрос, потому что, опять же, у нас много СМИ в Казахстане, кто пытается развиваться в социальных сетях, как на самостоятельных площадках. Поэтому ваш пример такого крутого трендового медиа для нас тоже будет важен, и нам интересно, почему у вас так же, так и как у нас.
So that's a great question. I actually want to bring you to a meeting with our, head of social media and ask them why we don't have enough likes and engagement. I think it'll go over really well. No, but it's a good question. When Quartz was founded, we said the homepage is dead. People find stories through social distribution. Every story needs to do the work of finding its reader. And that is how we built up our audience from 0 to 20 million over 5 years. By Facebook and Twitter. In terms of the engagement, the platforms have been changing almost every year. When we first launched, LinkedIn was a big platform for us. And when we cover the future of work and management, we got a lot of traffic there. And then LinkedIn decided to make its own content platform and wasn't pushing out publishers as much. Then suddenly Facebook comes onto the scene, and the news feed is huge for publishers, and that was really a heyday for us for a few years, and then Facebook decides to change its algorithm. and it really affects, our distribution and how we get traffic. Google search has become a lot bigger than it used to be. Platforms like Dig and Reddit and Pocket, places that, some of those places value high quality journalism and have communities of people who care about, finding good stories, have become important to us. I think aside from social media, social media is something we focus on. We have a growth team. They're very focused on telling those stories on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. It's, something that, as you pointed out, it's not we can't say it's a home run. We're growing and we're working at it. But again, the way that it's changed is constantly affecting our strategy. And I think one of the most important things for any new media organization or even a legacy publication that wants to use social media is to not put all your eggs into one basket, because these companies change all the time and you can't have your business model or your readership be at the whim of them. So to really be distributed and also to make your own communities, that's part of what having an app does. That's part of what having these email newsletters. It means that we're more in control of our readership and getting users to come back to us and not being so reliant on a platform that could change its algorithm.
Мы знаем, что в Казахстане для того, чтобы тебя увидели в социальных сетях, нужно заплатить Фейсбуку, Твиттеру там, и так далее, Инстаграму и так далее. И мы в том числе знаем, что таким медиа, как Quartz, платят за то, чтобы вы размещались на Фейсбуке, вы были в Твиттере, там, на каких-то других платформах. Расскажите, пожалуйста, про эту сторону и какие вам дополнительные возможности дают гиганты типа Фейсбука.
So, I would say in terms of paid promotion on social media, that is not, up until now, been a huge part of our strategy. We've really tried to have it be organic, and we use as a gauge, if we tweet something, do we have a good headline? Do readers engage with it? Paid has really been, I would say, a smaller fraction of our growth strategy on those networks. That's changing a little bit and it's growing, and I think it's definitely a factor. But if there's a story that people don't want to read, you can't pay to make it viral. That just doesn't work. So, we're constantly assessing these platforms. We have growth editors and directors who are constantly meeting with executives at Reddit and Twitter to find out different ways for engagement. One place that we've really had success on Facebook is in video. This year we're doing Quartz News Video, where we've hired, journalists around the world to produce weekly news videos, really to rethink how do you tell business stories in a very compelling and visual way around the world. And also, again, not perishable after a week, still be interesting and important. So again, sometimes it's not following the herd, but doing things in a little bit of a different way and saying, Quartzy, our lifestyle edition, we use Instagram in a way that's different than we use Instagram for QZ.com. And we use Facebook for video in a way that's different than, say, video on site. We think about YouTube now as kind of the future of our video platform. So we're constantly experimenting, constantly trying to see what works and doesn't work. But I think the biggest takeaway is that, partnerships and partner shares are also important on platforms like Facebook. The web is an ecosystem, and you kind of can't go it alone. So when we had the same owner as The Atlantic, the oldest magazine in the US with a huge Facebook following, we would swap stories, and when they see a Quartz story, maybe that grows the following. So I think, paid is just one of many tools you can use.
Back to the book. Well, I think it's a good book for all ages, and especially for those who love reading and hold the book itself. What's about those who like watching? So did you think of, have you ever thought of making a film about these objects?
So we were approached by a production company to make the book into documentary series, and we hope that happens.
I will say, I think one of the challenges of telling the kinds of stories that we did in video is that it is a different platform, and a lot of the ways that we, storytelling tricks that we use to make things important, the fold-outs and whatever, aren't going to play the same way in that format. So it would take really someone who's a genius in that platform to think about what does this mean for video, not how do you translate it to video.
Can you talk about your creative process? So how do you come up with your ideas and the big concept of doing a book, and then when you drill down to the separate objects, did you guys have any particular things that you did to try to think around the topic and come up with these like really creative ways to write about it?
I think what makes, a book is, it's bound, the structure is fixed, you have a certain number of pages. So I think often in print, the way you approach your storytelling has to be concept first rather than story first. So what we did, Lauren and I came up with what we actually did, we came up with this brief that was like, it has to be object-based, it has to be these certain kinds of objects and these certain kinds of stories. And then we gathered a team of researchers, some from inside the newsroom and some freelancers, to research along some sort of basic directions. Like, what would we do in terms of resources and minerals, resource extraction? While they were researching, we also held sort of interviews, hearings inside of Quartz, where we have a lot of experts who are topical. We have, one guy who writes extensively about space businesses, just published a book about it. We would hold interviews with our own journalists to talk to them about, like, okay, thinking about your beat generally, like, what's the big trend? What's the thing that's like 5 years out or that people are talking about now that we should focus on for something that people will consult in the future? Having done all that, we kind of had to get back together and be like, with all this information, does this fit the criteria? Like, is it visually striking? Is that important? And it was a very painful process. Most things did not make the cut. We have one of the hardest things was to throw away incredible stories that we just weren't able to make fit both the bars of really cool and interesting visual storytelling and also that important to the global economy. But that means we have lots of stories to write in the future.
I think the other thing is that, Caitlin and I love working with Caitlin. We're collaborators, but we also fight a lot. And that is a big part of the collaborative and creative process. I tend to think very big picture. Caitlin is amazing at thinking details and incisive on stories. So I think through that back and forth, we were able to settle on something that both spoke to the kind of big picture of the global economy, but also had very concrete and compelling stories. And even before we came up with the brief of what the book was, we spent probably a year, many times in my backyard, just talking this out. I mean, this wasn't something that we rushed into. The book came out in 2017, but we had been talking about it since 2015. And, I think as editors, our biggest, I think what we brought to the table the most was having an incredibly high bar for whether things made the cut. And at the end of the day, we had this list of objects and we said, is healthcare represented? We pulled back from the actual objects and looked at the different industries and said, is every facet of the economy somehow in here? Finance, food, health, logistics.
Also, I think it's just worth noticing, Lauren and I are both editors. And what that means is we spend a lot of our time rejecting story ideas. So we have a very clear process of creating tests for, is this a story that we apply in different sort of fields and different news areas. And I think it was maybe simpler for us to apply a similar test for the book. Is this a story? What are the characteristics of a story within this project? And then sticking to that. And I think that's actually pretty crucial to most creative processes. If you don't have a clear test from the outset for does this fit or does it not, is it for something else, it's really hard to make progress.
I'll add one more thing, because we could obviously talk about this book for forever, but while we did this book, we each had the rest of our jobs. I was juggling a number of other projects. Caitlin was editing a team of reporters, and in some ways, we're obsessive, so we spent tons of weekends working on this book, and ideally, you would just do this full time.
What impact has your visionary journalism had on the thinking of Donald Trump?
We are not sure yet that Donald Trump reads Quartz. I think a part of that is that apparently he doesn't use a computer. He is mobile first, but not necessarily. We don't know that he's a subscriber. He's Twitter first. We do think, hopefully, that we are making some impact on followers of Donald Trump. Sharing perspectives that could be useful there, and that our digital-first storytelling can sometimes be a more effective vehicle to do that. But of course, in terms of really attracting the ire of Donald Trump and making him see some, critical thinking in the American media, we're not the first among them, but we definitely support their work.
I would say, Caitlin, as the editor of Geopolitics, is kind of underselling the work she does and the incredibly creative approach that Quartz takes to politics. So because we're global, instead of just kind of being inside the Beltway and inside the US, we not only look at stories globally, but write for a global audience. So we are looking at Donald Trump and the impacts around the world, whether that's Africa. We just had a recent story about Scotland and the golf courses that Donald Trump tried to have there. We did a story about Russian oligarchs in the UK and their connection to Donald Trump, reporting on Hurricane Maria from Puerto Rico. So I think, that global perspective, and it's really easy to get wrapped up in the American bubble and the kind of the political talk, but being able to kind of look outside in at Trump and how it's being affected and heard around the world is a way that we are able to contribute.
I'll also just say one thing. I think knowing that your lens, in the case of Quartz, is always global, has helped us address some aspects of the U.S. administration in less common ways. So the way that we focus on immigration, we know that many times we're speaking to readers not who are outraged in the United States about this policy changing or whatever, but speaking to readers outside who really want to know, what's going to happen to my H-1B visa? What do you mean, this border is not going to be going to be something that I can cross anymore? Same thing for trade. So I think having sort of the thesis inbuilt in the coverage that we do, this needs to be useful for the people outside the U.S., allows us to focus on some threads within the general news cycle that can be helpful.
Thank you so much. You were amazing.